Hello, this is Tom Greco, and you're listening to Beyond Money Podcast. We are very pleased to have with us today John Attridge, who is currently the CEO of BXX-UK and Ireland, a reciprocal trade community which is part of the BBX network of trade exchanges that spans 14 countries and together services more than 90,000 customers. It is one of the scores of commercial trade exchanges operating around the world that provide their business customers with a way of trading with each other without the need to use conventional money. They do this by maintaining a ledger of member accounts on which credits from sales offset debits from purchases in a process called credit clearing. Together, the scores of trade exchanges operating around the world today enable moneyless trades worth several $billion annually. Welcome, John Attridge.
Hi, Tom, and welcome to everybody that's listening.
Okay, John, I'd like to start by asking you to give us a little bit more of your background and experience in the trade exchange industry, and then tell us specifically about the BBX Trade Exchange Network and how it differs from other trade exchange companies.
Sure. So my initial foray into the industry started in September of 1989, when I had a car rental company on Australia's Gold Coast, which is the premier tourist destination with 11 million odd visitors coming in every year. And we went through a 5-month-long pilots strike where we didn't have a single commercial flight land for 5 months. So you can imagine the devastating impact that would have on a car rental business relying on inbound tourists. So I ran across this idea where if we got together as a community and were able to exchange goods and services for goods and services using each other's spare capacity and a monetary unit that allowed you to be able to rent a car, gain some credit, and buy some cleaning rags or some advertising or some hotel space or whatever it is that I wanted to buy without having to do a direct exchange, that was fantastic. So I came across this idea. We started a little community, had about 50 initial businesses in it, and that grew and grew and grew till we got to the point where we had about 3,200 of these businesses involved in the platform through till about the year 2000, where we rolled that platform up into a competitive exchange, and myself and a business partner took an interest in that exchange to form one gigantic platform, which brought me to the UK. And one thing led to another. We exited that platform after an IPO back in 2009. And then I ran into an old friend, Michael Toomer, who started the BBX platform in 1993. And we helped him establish the BBX platform because he was in a different area in Australia to where we started. And he asked me what I was doing and said, would you like to get back into the reciprocal trade business? We call it the complementary currency business. And I said, yeah, why not? And so we started here from scratch 5 years ago here in the UK and Ireland. And today we have around 7,600 business owner customers on our platform trading here in the UK, and the BBX network, as you said, has over 90,000 in the other 13 countries that we operate in.
So BBX started in Australia, is that right?
Yeah, 1993. So by the Toomer family.
And tell us about how it managed to spread to 14 countries.
Yeah, so one of the difficulties in spreading an exchange or scaling any business, I guess, is to get a replicatable system of operation. And it doesn't matter whether you're selling widgets or a trade exchange concept. We've done it by a system of licensing and franchising. So I own the master license for here in the UK and Ireland, and in turn we then franchise and provide all the mentoring and ongoing support to the people who operate both the trading activity and the new customer acquisition activity on the ground in their area.
So is that the way it works in every country where BBX operates?
Yes, so it's done on a license and then in turn franchise model. And the current thing is we do it on a city license area rather than by country nowadays. And that means conurbations of around 10 million. So the person there operates that and then in turn franchises it to perhaps 10 different franchisees, and they can look after them in that local territory.
So how many franchisees do you have in your network in the UK and Ireland?
There's 16 franchise owners here. So a couple in Ireland, the rest all here in the UK.
And what is the typical size of those franchisees?
So they have customers running obviously from startup, some of them up to a few hundred customers. So between the lot of them, to get a good working franchise or a good community operating, I've always said that 350 clients in a given conurbation makes a good spread of businesses. And then we work from there to increase them to the next level of getting up to 1,000 in each one.
Okay, so you think the critical mass is around 350 to start?
Yes.
Okay, so let's suppose I take a franchise for a city in the UK, and I manage to round up 350 businesses to participate. How do I get them to trade with one another, and how do they trade with others in the rest of the UK?
That's a good question. So we do everything via an app nowadays. So it's a payment where a gateway that allows the owner to log in with their password and account number. And they then in turn, part of the thing you can do with the app is to pay another person. You can also receive payment from another person. So it's a little bit like PayPal in that regard. The app also does Yell.com type activity where you can look up the other customers in your area. It's got another little service that says who are the customers that are nearby, and you can set that out in 2 miles, 5, 10, whatever you want to do. And so it markets your business as well as points to everybody else in the community. So a franchise owner not only gets to trade with his own customers in his own area, but those customers can in turn trade with anybody else in another franchise territory's customer base as well. And in turn, all of our customers here in the UK can trade with the ones in China or India or Australia or wherever else.
So that's a seamless process.
Correct. It's not only seamless from franchise to franchise, but it's also seamless from country to country.
Uh-huh. Okay. Another question, are all of your members, if I can put it that way, incorporated businesses, or do you have professional service providers and unincorporated businesses participating as well?
Yeah, so we call them customers. So if you're doing business with a bank or a marketing company, you'd be a customer, not a member. We're not a golf club. So I know that's a very familiar term in the US particularly. But that aside, there's a number of ways of doing business with one another.
So I know some people in the UK that I've worked with have raised some concerns about including unincorporated businesses in a credit clearing trade exchange network. Is that a problem from your standpoint?
Yeah, so whether it's a sole trader, a partnership, or what we call a limited company here in the UK, or indeed a PLC, publicly listed company, then providing they can be searched through Companies House, we can then offer them an interest-free credit line of up to £100,000. And that's part of our process is lending money interest-free to customers as well. So,
but you're not actually lending money. You're just providing a line of trade credit, right?
That's correct. So it's pretty much like a credit card, if you want to put it that way. You can spend up to that limit and repay with your spare capacity. For individuals, they can have what we call a staff card or a consumer card, and they can hang off a main account. So, for instance, you might be the owner of a hotel and you have 50 employees and you want to pay them a staff bonus in BBX money for achieving over and above an average result for the month. So each of those people could receive 50, 100 trade pounds, as we call them here in the UK, into that account, and it hangs off the master account. It does not have a line of credit because according to the Consumer Credit Act here in the UK, we can only make lines of credit available for a registered business entity.
So the only condition is that it needs to be a registered business. It doesn't necessarily need to be a limited company.
You got it.
Okay, thank you. All right. The next set of questions relate to the ability of members to trade outside their local exchange. Now, you've already mentioned a little bit about that, but I'd like you to walk us through a typical trade. Let's say that I'm a member of a trade exchange, a BBX franchisee trade exchange in the UK, and I want to trade with a company in, say, Malaysia. How do I go about doing that?
So our platform via the app connects you, or through the account manager that's appointed to look after your account. The two parties, the buyer and seller, are connected. They agree a price like they normally would. At the day of transaction, according to the international money rate at that particular day, day of exchange. So if, for instance, there was 10,000 ringgit to 1,000 pounds, and that was the amount of the purchase, the home account would get 10,000 ringgit in BBX ringgit into their BBX Malaysia account, and at the same time, the UK purchaser would have a 1,000 BBX pound debit into their home UK account.
Okay, so you just use the spot rate on the foreign exchange market to make that conversion. Okay, the IRTA, the International Reciprocal Trade Association, they have this universal currency, or UC, to facilitate cross-exchange transactions. It sounds like you don't have much need for that. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. We don't have much need in the areas that we operate in, but BBX, for instance, we operate primarily in Southeast Asia and the UK and Ireland, whereas a lot of the companies that use UC are based in North America. So we don't have any presence there. So if someone wanted to trade, we had one the other day from a trade exchange customer in Canada who wanted to stay in Cork in Ireland, and we're able to do that using the UC platform. So we see it UC as a bolt-on addition to the offering that we can do directly on customer to customer through the BBX network.
Okay, I see. Well, thank you, John. Now, based on your long involvement in the commercial trade exchange industry, how would you describe its present status, and what are its future prospects?
That's a good question. There's been a lot of coming and going over the years since I've been involved with it, but there's also quite a few familiar faces that when I go to an IRTA convention, as I'm about to head down to Punta Cana, if that's how you pronounce it down there in the Dominican Republic, next week, there's some people there that I've met over the years that are still there today. Where the commercial industry is going, I think there's been a lot of consolidation in the industry. So some of the little mum and dad operations have been amalgamated into some of the bigger trade companies. Some have stayed by themselves in specific areas. But things like I was just talking about with apps and the general ability through social media and connectivity to be much closer to one another than we ever have been, particularly in the last 10 years, has allowed us to scale as an industry. So more and more people are able to get information on what we do, how we operate. It's very transparent. You know, if you're a bad operator, you'll be found out very quickly, no different to being a bad hotel, because social media catches up with you very quickly. So, you know, I think the industry is at the core of it, that businesses, so long as they continue to have spare capacity and want to do something about it, then there's always a bright future from this industry. There's an estimated $5 trillion worth goes to waste every single day.
So the trajectory of growth in the industry in recent years, has that been pretty much linear, or has it been at an accelerating rate?
I can't speak for the rest of the industry, but BBX itself has been around 26 years, and in the past 8 or 9 years, it's more than it's really expanded significantly compared to where it was. So BBX is certainly hitting a very upward hockey stick curve as we expand into other countries and more franchisees come on board.
What are the problems you see in establishing in other countries? I know there's a lot of variation in the legal environment in different jurisdictions. Uh, has there been any significant problem that you've seen over the years as the BBX network has expanded into other countries?
Yes, there's been challenges at various times. For instance, when we began initially in India, there was resistance from the government thinking we're a cryptocurrency. And so we had to jump through a whole lot of hoops to explain what, in fact, we were before we could start operations there. We've had a lot of inquiry here from the banking sector in particular. And so a lot of banks perhaps are looking at us as a potential competitor nowadays, particularly with the advent of cryptocurrency. So oddly enough, even though we're not a cryptocurrency, and we don't, we are looking at blockchain activities to support our transactions authenticity. So that's an area where banks have looked at us and thought we're a horse, but indeed we're a giraffe. And so it's had taken some time to explain that, yes, we've got four legs, but we are, in fact, one or the other.
Yeah, I know there are cases in the U.S. where trade exchange operators have had their bank accounts suspended because they were talking about crypto and the banks didn't understand. They were thinking that it was something similar to Bitcoin and they didn't want to have anything to do with that. So there was a process of educating the bankers to what the difference really is. But can you say a little bit, John, about how you see the possibility of employing blockchain technology in the credit clearing operation? Is there any additional functionality that blockchain might provide?
Yes, we do a lot of real estate transactions, for instance. So I don't know what you call it in the US, but property. And so people buy and sell property using BBX money as part or full payment. And that is an area where the ability to unequivocally understand who in fact owns the property in order to sell it is paramount. And so those principles will apply as they do in the big wide world into the BBX world because we're part payment in that process. So anything that establishes us as a visible, transparent currency is a good thing, and we're embracing that.
Let's talk about scale. One of the problems that most trade exchanges have is that they're relatively small and they're relatively thin as far as the supply chain is concerned. A lot of the trade exchanges will have a few hundred members, as you pointed out, and they will involve retail businesses, restaurants, and professional service providers. They have a hard time drilling down through the supply chain to lower levels, beyond retail down to wholesale, to include manufacturers, to include basic commodity producers, and ultimately to provide services to employees, labor being a major component of economic improvement. So, to what extent has BBX been able to drill down into the supply chain beyond the retail level, and to what extent have you been able to scale? I know you mentioned the franchising and the apps that allow trade exchange customers to trade across the lines of local exchanges. But can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, other than to reiterate that, if you've got five small exchanges, each with 200 customers in them in a certain area, they're all in Michigan or wherever, if they were able to all trade together, you'd have 1,000 customers, and therefore you get a whole different dynamic, and that's what franchising allows the BBX model to achieve for its customer base. So it's good for the franchise. There's no competition because each franchise, as they bring new customers into the network, then those customers can trade with adjoining franchises. So everybody's incentivized to build their base rather than be acting as in a competitive environment.
Well, why not just have a national UK exchange in one exchange with one ledger? Why go through the trouble of having local exchanges at all?
Well, BBX has one exchange, but the franchise network allows us to interact with one another and provide a uniform delivery to those customers, because it's a little bit like McDonald's in a way, that you've got the same method being rolled out rather than 10 different independent people with different thought processes.
So does the BBX UK have a single ledger, or do the individual franchisees maintain their own ledger?
No, we have a central ledger.
Okay. And what about the supply chain?
Well, because you've got a bigger density of customers, then you've got more encouragement for a supply chain to come and have a look at us. If you've only got one hotel that needs to supplied with soap, the soap guy thinks, well, that's nice, but if you had 15 hotels, then that's a job that they could certainly embrace more readily. So it's the incentive of having a bigger community that brings in the supply chain.
Okay, well, what about manufactured goods? Do you have any way of bringing in manufacturers into your network?
Absolutely. In the same vein, manufacturers, particularly those that have a retail outlet, so if they can sell from their cellar door or whatever it happens to be, if it's a winery, they'd much prefer to do that because there's greater margins. And so if they don't have to include their middleman and they can deal with a closed community which is not upsetting their distribution network, then they embrace that rather than turn away from it. So the trick is getting to the person who makes the decision on the operation of the business. And the bigger the business, the harder that gets.
Well, food is one of the major necessities. Do you have farmers and food producers in your network?
Absolutely. There's 1,036 different verticals. So if you looked in the old Yellow Pages directory, it pretty much is represented across the BBX world in the same way. There's 1,036 different entries in our directory globally.
Okay, well, you mentioned earlier that you can have individuals involved as employees. I know there's been a lot of discussion about B2B and B2C and C2C, B being business and C representing consumer. Can you talk a little bit about how you're handling that and trying to include consumers in your network?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of examples of that. We have a customer that has about 1,000 consumers in another closed network. And again, without offering lines of credit, that main account, it distributes part of their BBX earnings on a monthly basis to that base, which enables them as non-business owners to buy goods and services from any other people in the community. Their purchase is a little different to a business. A business will buy accounting and marketing and whatnot, whereas the consumer will buy more day-to-day stuff like a holiday or go to the dentist or a gift for their children, that sort of thing.
Okay, and then the transactions take place via computer, by cell phone, by cards. How do you actually handle the mechanics of a transaction?
So as I said before, on every customer, they download an app for free once they have an account by entering their account number and a password. They then have access to the app, which gives them an online directory. It gives them a marketplace. And on the app is also an ability to pay someone else or get paid by someone else via QR code. So there's no physical cards, there's no physical paperwork. It's all done via the app.
So it's pretty advanced in terms of current technologies.
Our whole system, we've spent millions on it. So it is a very sophisticated and moving territory. It's a moving conveyor belt. It's getting updated every day.
Yeah, I know the UK has been sort of a hotbed of experimentation in local and community currencies over the last few decades. We've seen currencies like the Bristol pound and the Brixton pound and the Totnes pound and many others like that. Do you have any thoughts about their effectiveness or future possibilities in contrast to the credit clearing process that you and other commercial trade exchanges use?
again, I like the analogy. There's horses and the giraffes. They've both got four legs, and the Totnes pound or the Bristol pound is got a different rationale behind it. So the idea, for those that aren't aware of community currencies here, is that you take your fiat money, your pound sterling, you go to the post office or some central clearing place. In return, you gain the local Bristol pound, and then there are a certain amount of businesses within Bristol that will accept that Bristol pound. The idea being is that once money comes in to the community from somewhere else, it's more likely to rotate within the community of people that accept that particular pound, and therefore leakage does not occur. The only trouble with that is that when someone wants to leave and take it somewhere else, they can go to the post office with their Bristol pound, return it back to fiat, and then it exits the community. So it's a totally different animal than a trade exchange platform.
Right. I've written about this myself, and there's been recently an academic study that showed that the Bristol pound specifically really isn't achieving what it was intended to achieve, because as long as it's sold for cash and redeemable back into cash, it doesn't really stay in the community very long. Talking about cryptocurrencies again, Bitcoin has had the effect of opening people's minds to the possibility of exchange mechanisms other than national currencies like the pound or dollar. And so it's been very helpful in that way. But Bitcoin, as I see it, is a virtual commodity. And so not much of the Bitcoin is being used to facilitate transactions. Very few Bitcoin payments are recorded day to day. Most of the Bitcoins are held as a speculative medium or a hedge against inflation of the national currencies. Do you have any thoughts about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, well, they have their place for those that want an improving asset, or on the other flip side, one that can decline and quickly. So until they get their wild fluctuations in order, people probably won't use them as a method to buy goods and services because of the stability of the price of the currency. So no one's going to sell a hotel room for whatever fraction of a Bitcoin today and see it worth only half that tomorrow. Those that want to speculate and have extra money, and if you've got spare capacity, the whole thing is if you've got spare capacity and it goes to waste tomorrow, you can never ever, if you've got a hotel room, recapture that revenue ever again. So if you've got a Bitcoin and a new customer for that empty room, that's brilliant. Whatever happens to it after that, it's better than having an empty room. But it's a different animal to a trade exchange mechanism. As I say, the cryptocurrency is better for people that want to speculate, turning something that they didn't have before into some held value. The problem with Bitcoin and other cryptos is that if people are exchanging fiat currency to obtain it rather than mine it, then they run the risk of the price going down. So it really does become a gamble. And certainly not one so far because of the high price of processing, and that will change. But Bitcoin at the moment, if you buy a cup of coffee with it and the processing fee is more than the cup of coffee, then why would you buy a cup of coffee? You may as well use fiat.
Right. Well, looking at the economic situation worldwide, we all remember 2008 when we came close to having a global meltdown of the financial infrastructure around the world, and it was only with extreme measures taken by various governments and central banks that they were able to stave off collapse. So we had this process called quantitative easing, which was basically creating floods of money to relieve the banks of their bad loans. Many economists are predicting that we're in for another similar or even worse crisis in the coming years. Do you see it that way, and do you see what impact that might have on the commercial trade exchange industry?
Yeah, so having an economics background, the fiat system as we know it globally today is a fatally flawed system. When the extent of debt And you look at the American debt, it's the last time I looked was like 19 trillion. It gets to the point where the interest bill on the borrowing becomes more than your GDP. And when that happens, it's mathematically impossible to correct the ship. It's reached its tipping point and you can't recover. Yes, there will be another global financial crisis and it will be bigger than the ones before, and mainly because of the automatic triggering mechanisms of stock markets. Because it only takes a little upset, the computer takes over, and next thing everyone goes into panic, and then that creates a stampede, and we've seen that here. So the immediate effect on that is that I'd immediately advise anybody to stock on basic food for a short period of time, and certainly water, because they're the two things that if there's a rush on something at the supermarket, they'll be the first two things to go. And trade exchanges will still be around. I came through a pilot's dispute when there was not a commercial airplane flying for 5 months in the entire country. It took the Australian government and Prime Minister at the time to sack any airline pilot and threaten them with never having a license ever again if they didn't get back to work, to get them back in the air. So during that period, it was like a financial meltdown, and we survived that because we're able to still offer each other goods and services that we have in our business. Those that can remember the GFC in 2008, if you owned a business, did you still have the stock on the shelf? Yes, you did. If you owned the hotel, was it still open? Of course it was. So what actually changed? It was only a recorded piece of information in digital form on a ledger somewhere. That's the only thing that ever changed through the whole thing. You still had a hotel room to offer. So if there's some mechanism that allows you to do that, then you can help buffer some of the harder times.
Well, but you didn't have the floods of tourists coming in to rent those hotel rooms. So you're basically thrown back into what Australians could trade with one another. That was a little different situation, let's say, compared to the Great Depression, when there wasn't enough conventional money in circulation. During that time, a lot of local currencies cropped up. They were called scrip issues, issued by different entities like clearinghouses and school districts and municipal governments that provided alternative exchange media based on the capacity to provide goods and services locally. So, it's probably going to turn that way again when we see the next financial crisis, that I would expect your industry to get a real boost in that situation because you're providing an alternative medium of exchange in the form of trade credits. You mentioned the U.S. government debt. By the way, it's actually up around 21 trillion at this point. And the reason they've been able to keep the deficits from going astronomical, I mean, they're still in the realm of $1 trillion a year, but the central banks around the world manipulate interest rates to keep that from going even worse. We have in many places negative interest rates where your deposits are going to lose value as time goes on rather than gain value. And this is hurting a lot of people, particularly retirees who depend on interest income from their savings in order to live day to day. I would expect that commercial trade exchanges will probably benefit and have a heyday when the next financial crisis hits. Well, John, thank you for being with us today. I'm wondering, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with our listeners before we close?
No, other than it's been a pleasure to be here. If anybody wants to contact me, they know where we are. Just one other little thing with a trade exchange platform. One of the things that we've found, other than buying and selling to one another, is that because you're a part of a community with like-minded business owners, and our people that are on a trade exchange are a little more entrepreneurial than the average person. They want to do something different to get a better result. So they either want to grow their business, get a better lifestyle from running the business, or sell it for more at the end of a period of time. So part of that comes a mentoring and sharing of information platform that we also use. So, it's a lonely place business sometimes. You're a great mechanic, but where do you get ideas on how to do other stuff that you don't know a lot about? And a community always delivers that sort of thing. It's like going to the library. If you've got a nice library in every place, it's a lot easier to do business if you have knowledge, because it's power, as they say. So it's been a pleasure to be with you today. And if anybody wants to contact me, Tom, you have all my details.
Okay, we will put your links on our program notes, John. Well, thanks again for being with us, and best wishes to you.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Beyond Money podcast interview with John Attridge, CEO of BXX-UK and Ireland. You can learn more about BBX by visiting their website at bbxuk.com. And you can learn more about commercial trade exchanges in general at irta.com. To be notified of upcoming podcasts on this channel, please follow us at beyondmoney.net.